So, I'm in a kind of a very anxious state. So, 2 books, 5 women authors who we want to celebrate, and a dance style which has taken centuries to evolve, a lot of work in hand. So, we'll get going fast. The session deals with research and writings of 5 women who have created 2 historiographies. Shovana ji and Geetika Kalha's book says the book will shatter many popular perceptions, such as Mughal origins of Kathak or the belief that Kathak is the dance of courtesans. Arshiya Sethi and Shama Bhate and Shilpa Bhide worked on a biography of a Non-Gharanedaar Kathak maestro through narratives of 3 women, 2 cities, and 1 story. Intriguing. I would like to ask all 3 of you to take a very short time, sorry about that, so about 2 to 3 minutes to tell us about the passion, the need to write this book at this moment of time.
At the outset, let me first thank the Jaipur Lit Fest for including us and our book over here, and to all of you for here. Well, the passion actually started for me was that when I heard about Kathak villages, it was a totally different ball game. And this was way back in 2003. When I found the villages and I saw the photographs, etc., I took the photographs. Predictably, the world in Delhi did not take it seriously. And then it was only in 2014 that when I was working on something else, another research work, and I saw the census of India, and then the Kathak villages kept popping up with village codes, so which meant it was serious. And therefore, that started me on the journey. And then I was very happy to have Geetika join me on the way. And we went, and it was to find out why the villages were named Kathak villages. So if they were named, we found that they were because of the Kathak community, the Kathak Lok who lived there. Who were they? What were they doing? And then slowly, so one question led to another. The interesting part of it was its linkage also to a certain region, and which also led to, looking and going back. Fortunately, I had been doing research work since the 8th. Yeah. And so it was going, so in the Natya Shastra, the first, the chapter talks about the need for an audio-visual medium as to how it's going to hit you straight in the heart, and that is how you spread values. Therefore, these Kathak Lok people, that was what they were doing. They were actually, through their Nritya Seva, they never call it performance, they call it Nritya Seva, through their Nritya Seva, were reaching out and sort of with their values, etc., in a very simple way, and which actually touched the hearts of the gathered congregation, the devotees around. This was it was all the Vedas combined, it was everything combined, philosophy combined, everything others, and also the fact that now when you started seeing it, you saw the linkage to the Natya Shastra, the region, the villages, the linkage again to the Natya Shastra, now chapter 36. Now, also, the Kathaks are mentioned in the Mahabharata, Adi Parva section, that is what I found out in 1980-81. And then it was also then in 90s, there was a Prakrit inscription talking about the Kathaks. This time, the Nritya Dharma hai, Nritya unka dharma hai. So, and the linkage was to Banaras and to Adidev. And also then, what were they? What community did they come from? Because there was a distinction that a person they can only belong to this particular community. There was casteism. So to a particular caste, because the Brahmins were supposed to dispense the dispensers of knowledge, they were the keepers of knowledge, and that is how so therefore, they only did Nritya Seva in the temple. So the locale was important, the purpose and vision and mission was important, the community was important, their social, what was their social standing in the village community or in that local community, then also became an issue. That also was important. Then why were the Kathaks then, certain villages devoid of Kathaks? They also did it, which went straight to the heart. And that we have the three kinds of ways of talking about, reaching, communicating, which Mammat has mentioned in his 11th century AD. Now, with all this background, then the question was, what were they talking about? If you had the Ganikas, these were male that we are talking about, but you had the Ganikas. Now, what were the Ganikas doing? Well, how did it relate to the present day Kathak that we are doing? And now those linkages started coming out. Again here, an early research I had done was study of the temples I would say a study of the sculptures lying in museums, not of temples, because the temples are only 1,000 years old. But the sculptures are much older, 2,300 years old. And those Maurya period sculptures give you the costume, which is like churidar angarkha and the lehenga. It gives you also the pirouette, कि हम चक्र भ्रमरी कर रहे हैं. So now, here again we are taking it back to the Maurya period, 4th century BC, to the Mahabharat period. And therefore, all this work that was going on, this research, and then finally in this particular research, everything coalesced, because then you found the Kathaks are also the community being mentioned in the Bhavishya Puran. And what kind of Brahmins they are, and what category. So and then you come to the colonial period, the mindset of that time, when from early times they were kept separate from entertainment, but in the 19th century they started being categorized along with the list of entertainers in William Crookes' census of 1892. But very clearly said they are devotional dancers. Very clearly said they are male Brahmins. Very clearly talked about the Gotras. So everything was mentioned, but the categorization, because in 13th century Sangeet Ratnakar, they are categorized separately. So all these aspects were there. And so for me, I love sharing. I just love sharing. I'm sharing my knowledge with my students, and so I loved sharing. So that was the passion and the motivation.
That comes across
quite clearly.
So please, Geetika ji.
I think Shovana has said almost roughly everything, but I'll just put it in brief thing, because she had discovered those villages, and we went and saw them. From there, we discovered that the villages were actually named after the Kathak Brahmins. And what these Brahmins were doing was that they were performing in the temples. Now, we wanted to know why are they performing and what is this tradition of Brahmins dancing in temples. One has heard of, singing and mantra and all that, but dancing. So that's when we learned that there is actually a tradition of Kanta Samit Updesh, which I don't know if you have heard, because there are three kinds of doing Updesh in this country. One is the Ved Samit Updesh, which is which is just lecturing, and the student is just supposed to learn. The second tradition is Sugrid Samit Updesh, which is like talking to a friend. You can ask questions of your teacher. The third tradition is Kanta Samit Updesh, where music and dance is used for giving Updesh. Now, that is actually today something called narrative theology. And this was started in India, as Shovana has mentioned. It is mentioned in 4th century BC that we were actually teaching people with the use of music and dance. And that is how you see that the Ramayana and the Mahabharata is so ingrained in Indian mind because of this tradition of passing it on. Now, this was very fascinating for us, and then we wanted to find out more. And these Kathak villages were actually named after the Kathaks who were given these villages in Jagir. Now, having got this whole background of Brahmins and Kanta, Samitupdesh, the question arose that then what about those dancing girls? Because I had grown up thinking that Kathak was Mughal dance, dancing girls. Then we began to question that. Okay, how can the two be there? Then we went into this whole business of what is this dancing girl, and we discovered that the Kathaks were actually masters in Natya and masters in all fine art. They knew music, they knew dance, they knew makeup, they knew theater, they knew the whole gamut of art. They were the masters of this country. So if a dancing girl wanted to really perform well, and if she was good and she could afford, she would learn from a master, Kathak master. So that is how the link is there. The Kathaks were actually teachers, because a Brahmin can only teach or he can pray. He can't do a third profession. So they were allowed to teach the Ganikas, later the Tawayafs, but not the lower rung. And the Tawayafs and the Ganikas, we realized, were respected artists in society. They were not, they were working women. And from that, then we went on. The next question was that how did we forget this whole story? How did we forget this Kathak tradition, Kanta Samit Updesh? Kaise bhool kaise gaye hum? Then we examined that, and we discovered that it was actually when the British came here, when the British were renewing their license of the East India Company, they made it mandatory that the missionaries will be allowed to, the missionaries will be supported by the East India Company to spread Christianity. Now, how do you spread Christianity in villages and things like that? Is to counter the Brahmins who were spreading Hinduism. They were the ones teaching people about the Dharma and the rest of it. So they started attacking them, saying that you are actually pimps because you also are in touch with the Tawayafs. So they called them pimps, and they started the anti-Notch movement, which many of you may be familiar with, those of you study history, anti-Notch movement. It made it a criminal offense to dance. So and many Indians bought into this. If you read our book, we'll quote some of what is written in that, that how the Indians also bought into it. And the upper classes started saying that our dance is very bad, and they started ballroom dancing and this, that. Then technology came in, people started records and things like that, and slowly, a few Kathaks were left for Bollywood. Then Bollywood came in. Bollywood totally finished this whole story because they started films like Mughal-e-Azam, I think, was a disaster for Kathak, because, everybody started believing that Kathak is in the Mughal court. And because I must talk about this a little bit about the Mughal court, that how the Mughal court is supposed to be the home of Kathak. So Shovana and me have examined Kathak totally. We have tried to find from all sources, books, internet, this, that, the other, if has anybody actually studied a medieval dance and Kathak and said ki what is the influence? Is the influence on some movement, is the something on some mudra, kya aaya hai wahan se? So with her knowledge of Kathak, we were able to go through each and every bit of Kathak and examine, and we did not find anything except a few words like Amad and Tarana and some words. It's like in yoga today we are saying Cobra pose, we are saying Chakra. Does that mean that yoga is British because we have changed few names of our asanas? It doesn't. So some words of Persian were introduced, but there is no influence on the dance itself, of the British. So it became so if you read this book, it is really, what is important here is how we have forgotten our own heritage. How easy it is to forget, and how important it is to do research on this.
I will ask
Thank
her
you.
to speak, So the question is about your passion about writing this book. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Urmi, and thank you very much for this passionate explanation. And I really do not have this similar story. None of us have same stories, so my story is a little different. If I were to go chronologically, 2019 saw me in New York working on a biography of an Indian dance pioneer in the United States of America. I thought I would come back to complete the work at the next year, but it was COVID and we got the shock as we were all locked up. I have with me two other authors who are not present here, Shama Bhate and Shilpa Bhide. So COVID allowed us to connect with friends, and so in one conversation I just happened to mention that I like very much, can I just see the book? The dance of Mohanrao Kallianpurkar, who was an early pioneer. At that time I did not realize the importance, seminal importance of this man. I just loved his dance. So I mentioned it to Shama Bhate, who is a practitioner, the disciple and daughter-in-law of Rohini Bhate, who herself was the disciple of Mohanrao Kallianpurkar. And she said, well, that's something we share in common. And you know, I did his centenary seminar. So I said, oh, then we should look at writing a book on this, you know, because here's what I have felt always, that writing on the arts is inadequate, it is patchy, it is of unequal quality, and very often it is a statist version. It doesn't go into depths like they are going into censuses and things like that. It just sort of is a cut and paste version. So the myths and mythologies around the arts just continue unabated. So I like small histories, because when you work intensely on a small area, you can go in depth, and very often you find questions for another narrative that has been fed to you for a very long time. So I felt that writing a book was very important. There were still people who knew him when he was alive, and maybe delaying it was not a good idea. She suggested the third author, Shilpa Bhide, who in turn is her disciple. And we realized that we were three non-Gharanedaar dancers. I have also learned Kathak. In fact, Jaipur is a city where I learned a lot of Kathak. And I'm so happy that there are many of our friends who are present here. So thank you for coming. Your presence here makes writing this book worthwhile. Anyway, we used technology and listed out 80 people that we interviewed afresh. And you know, one of the saddest things was we lost some of them to COVID before we could get to interview them. Nevertheless, this whole thing came together and the book got written. I was in that mindscape. Shamaji was keen to create something more meaningful and longer lasting than a brochure for this thing. And Shilpa was the one who kept us with our flights of fancy, grounded, rooted in the drive, and funny things. Shamaji is a morning person, I'm a night person. Poor Shilpa was really put to the grind. The one thing that is very important about this book, so writing small histories, I mean, if I had more time, I'd tell you details how lots of things came out. I'll just cite one example. Now, in the books that we have presently of Kathak, there is reference always to a particular dance drama called Malti Madhav, and it comes through as if Birju Maharajji was the first one to have done it. No. Before Birju Maharajji, Mohanrao Kallianpurkar had also created a dance drama called Malti Madhav. The story is very interesting in this case. He's the first non-Gharanedaar. No, nobody in his family had ever danced. Music hota tha, because he's a Chitpur Brahmin, you know, Saraswat Brahmin. And so they have singing of their holy text and singing of religious songs, bhajans, matis they're called and all that, but playing the sitar, which is what he was very adept at, or singing, which also he was adept at, or dancing, which was like, so the trauma in the family, and nothing has changed. It's still the same. I remember, there are some people here who might remember my father visiting me when I did my performance here. He didn't know where to look, you know, what was this girl doing dance for, and she should be taking the IAS exam or something like that. Anyway, so these stories came alive again for us. Because of Shilpa being younger, she put up this thought, why aren't we using QR codes? Because we have actually some footage. We have lots more photographs than the 16 pages the publisher gave us of photographs. So we tried every trick. Now Shamaji just backed off saying this is all too hep for me, but I went with Shilpan. Thank God, because this then becomes the first book on Indian dance with QR codes, so it has a cloud attached to it. There are 19 QR codes you will find in the book, actually 20. So what is the 20th? It is for material that we would get later. So what has happened is, around this book, an archive around this man has also developed. Since we do not have a proper dance archive, I think the importance of this book is also that it has a small archive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I just have a single question or an observation, and any one of you can take this on. So all 5 of you authors are female. You are, yes, and you are all celebrities. You are very, very well known for your dance world interventions, your work as authors. How do you feel as women to write and portray a power structure which is obviously male in history? Any one of you wants to take on, because it's an uneasiness that I feel that, of course, 2 histories can exist together in my mind. I don't have to cross out one history to write another. And I feel that I could celebrate the women dancers while giving the teaching role to the males. So it's just my question.
Can I take it? If you don't mind, can I take it? Okay. So when this book was written, it became a big family affair. 2 minutes only. Okay, it became a big family affair. His daughter asked me right away, 38 years, the man has been dead. Why are you writing a book on him right now? I said, because he was a gentleman guru. Not a breath of scandal or any trouble with him. As a non-Gharanedaar, the first non-Gharanedaar, nationally recognized, nationally awarded guru, he opened the door for so many other non-Gharanedaars. For instance, these 3 women. So hundreds of women came forth to learn from him, because sometimes when the parents had concerns, they were happy that a man who was educated, a science person, was the one who was teaching. He created a syllabus for Kathak, which took away the whimsicalness of traditional gurus and their pedagogical process. I think it's a pro-women book.
If you just a minute, I'll just just a minute. I would like to add that as far as non-Gharanedaars, our book, we're talking about those Gharanedaars, but then the colonial period went into the non-Gharanedaar, and the entire period comes to the non-Gharanedaar, and I would also say the period of the 20th century, a lot of non-Gharanedaars came into the fray, whether it was our famous, अरे उनका नाम क्या था 30s में along 40s. One was of course Sadhana Bose, but हमारे Leela. I'm forgetting.
So we can continue this
Purvai amongst the. So we had all of them, non-Gharanedaars, women coming and opening the barriers.
One sentence only: behind every man there's a woman. Yes. And it was the women that supported this whole movement, because it was a family tradition. And without the lady of the house also supporting this tradition, no, this would have died long back.
Thank you very much for the questions. And the lack of time did not allow us to ask questions and have you participate. I'm sure you can continue it outside and other spaces. Please come and talk to the authors.